Have you ever wondered what secrets hide behind the perfect Instagram family? Millionaire came home and saw his black adopted daughter eating dog food. He froze when he heard her speak. Jonathan Richard stopped at the entrance to the kitchen of his Beverly Hills mansion, the blood freezing in his veins. Through the half-open door, he saw a scene that would forever shatter his worldview. Aisha, his 8-year-old adopted daughter, was crouched on the floor, eating directly from a metal bowl in the corner of the kitchen. The same bowl that belonged to Duke, his golden retriever, who had died the year before. For 30 eternal seconds, Jonathan couldn't process what he was seeing. Aisha, the girl he had adopted 3 years ago from an orphanage in Detroit, was literally eating dry dog food as silent tears streamed down her thin face. What shocking truth would you uncover in your own home? "Finish it, you disgusting thing," came the cold voice of Victoria, his wife of 15 years. "That's the dinner a liar deserves. Who told you to tell your father I don't feed you?" Jonathan Richards, at 42, had built a technology empire worth $200 million. He was known for his analytical mind, his calm under pressure, and his ability to find solutions to impossible problems. But at that moment, watching his adopted daughter being forced to feed herself like an animal, his mind simply shut down. The discovery became even more devastating when he remembered the phone call 2 hours earlier. Aisha had called his office, whispering that she was hungry because Victoria had forgotten to make her lunch again. He had laughed, thinking it was just childish drama, and promised to bring pizza home. "Daddy won't believe you," Victoria continued, now with an almost amused tone in her voice. "He knows I take good care of you. We're a happy family, aren't we?" It was then that Jonathan heard the answer that made him understand the true extent of the horror. "Yes, Mommy Victoria. We're a happy family." Aisha's voice was small, broken, but it carried a resignation that number 8-year-old should know. It was the tone of someone who had learned that survival depended on lying about one's own suffering. Jonathan backed away silently, his heart pounding against his chest. For 3 years, he had traveled the world building businesses, blindly trusting that Victoria was caring for Aisha like a loving mother. The perfect Instagram photos, the positive school reports, the forced smiles during rare family meals. It had all been a meticulously orchestrated charade. In that silent hallway of his $10 million mansion, Jonathan Richards faced a brutal truth. He had rescued Aisha from an orphanage only to deliver her to a hell disguised as paradise. But what Victoria didn't know was that the man who had become a millionaire at 25 wasn't just a business genius. He was someone who had grown up as the only black kid in elite schools, who had faced every form of subtle and not-so-subtle racism that money couldn't buy. Can you imagine the strength it takes to fight for justice within your own family? If you're following this story of family betrayal that goes beyond anything you could ever imagine, be sure to subscribe to the Black Voices channel, because what happens next will show you why some secrets are too powerful to remain buried forever. 3 hours later, Jonathan was in his private office on the top floor of the mansion, but his mind remained in that kitchen. He had sent Victoria a message saying he had an urgent international call and would be having dinner later. He needed time to process what he had witnessed. He opened his laptop and began meticulously reviewing the last 3 years of his family life. Like an analyst dissecting financial data, Jonathan began to identify patterns he had completely overlooked. Victoria's Instagram photos always showed Aisha in the background, slightly out of focus, while she posed radiantly. School reports mentioned that Aisha often arrived late and looked tired. Victoria always explained that the girl had adjustment issues and needed extra discipline to fit into their privileged life. "She comes from a very difficult background, honey," Victoria would say with a condescending smile. "I have to be strict so she learns how to behave in our social class." Jonathan remembered his own childhood. At 8, he was the only black kid at an elite prep school in Connecticut. The son of academic parents who had sacrificed everything to give him the best opportunities. He knew intimately the bitter taste of discrimination disguised as high standards, but he had never imagined it could happen inside his own home. He opened the locked drawer of his desk and removed a device that looked like a standard charger, but was actually a high-tech digital recorder. Over the years of building his empire, Jonathan had learned that information was power, and power misused needed to be documented. As he discreetly installed monitoring devices around the house, his mind returned to details that now took on new meaning. Victoria always insisted that he travel more, especially on weekends. Aisha needs routine and discipline, she would say. It's better when there's no interference. Interference. The word now sounded like what it really was. He was being deliberately kept away from his own daughter. Around 10 o'clock that night, Jonathan quietly descended the stairs. The house was quiet, but he could hear voices coming from the TV room. He discreetly activated the monitoring app on his cell phone and listened to Victoria talking on the phone with her younger sister, Rebecca. No, she's well under control, Victoria laughed coldly. Jonathan is hardly ever home, and when he is, she knows exactly what to say to keep him happy. It's just a matter of training. But don't you think you're overreacting? Came Rebecca's hesitant voice over the speakerphone. Rebecca, please. You saw what the children were like at that orphanage. Wild, uneducated. Someone needs to civilize her. And Jonathan is too soft to do what needs to be done. He sees a needy little girl and wants to play the savior. I see reality. Jonathan felt his blood run cold as Victoria continued. Besides, she's useful. Jonathan feels like a hero for saving a black child. It gives him that progressive feeling that rich people love to have. And as for me, well, someone has to clean this huge house, doesn't someone? Victoria's cruel laughter echoed through the monitor, and Jonathan had to lean against the wall to keep from collapsing. His wife didn't just mistreat Aisha. She saw her as free labor and him as a manipulable fool. But Victoria had made a fundamental mistake. She had completely underestimated who she was dealing with. Jonathan Richards hadn't built a $200 million empire by being naive or forgiving betrayal. He had grown up facing people who smiled to his face while plotting his downfall. He had learned early on that the sweetest revenge doesn't come from anger, but from strategic patience. During the early hours of the morning, while Victoria slept peacefully beside him, Jonathan spent hours gathering evidence. Bank transfers she thought he didn't monitor. Text messages to friends bragging about how she had tamed the little girl. Medical records she had altered to hide possible signs of abuse. Each saved file was like a chess piece being placed on the board. At 5 o'clock in the morning, Jonathan did something he hadn't done in years. He made breakfast. He went down to the kitchen where he had witnessed the devastating scene hours earlier and began making pancakes, Aisha's favorite. When the girl appeared at 6, already dressed for school, her eyes widened in surprise at the sight of her father in the kitchen. Victoria appeared moments later, clearly irritated by the break in routine. What a lovely surprise, Victoria said, forcing a smile. Daddy decided to make breakfast for us. Jonathan watched Aisha hesitate before sitting down at the table, her eyes darting nervously between him and Victoria, as if calculating whether it was safe to show her joy. Eat up, my princess, Jonathan said, piling a generous stack of pancakes onto Aisha's plate. You need your energy to grow strong. Victoria laughed, but there was an almost imperceptible tension in her voice. Be careful not to spoil her, dear. You know how children can take advantage of kindness. It was then that Jonathan looked directly at Victoria and said something that made her smile falter. Sometimes, Victoria, people take advantage of others' kindness in ways we can't even imagine. But fortunately, there's always a moment of reckoning. Aisha looked at her father curiously, not quite understanding. But Victoria understood the veiled threat perfectly. For a second, something like fear flashed across her eyes before she regained her composure. What Victoria didn't know was that every word of this conversation was being recorded, and that Jonathan had already begun to move pieces in a game she didn't even suspect she was playing. For years, she had underestimated the man beside her, seeing him only as a source of money and social status. But someone who builds an empire at 25 is not someone who accepts betrayal passively, especially when it involves hurting an innocent child he had promised to protect. Over the next 7 days, Jonathan became the most attentive man Victoria had ever seen. He came home early from work, suggested family dinners, and even proposed a trip to Disneyland the following weekend. What a romantic phase, Victoria commented to her friends over lunch at the exclusive Beverly Hills Club. Jonathan has been so affectionate lately. He must be feeling guilty about traveling so much. What she didn't know was that Jonathan's every gesture of affection had a strategic purpose. Each hug was an opportunity to discreetly install more monitoring devices. Each romantic dinner was a chance to study her behavior patterns when she felt safe and unprepared. On Friday morning, Jonathan did something unheard of. He canceled a $40 million meeting to take Aisha to school himself. Victoria tried to dissuade him, claiming she had an established routine with the girl, but he insisted. "I want to spend more time with my daughter," he said with a smile that Victoria interpreted as paternal guilt, but which actually concealed a fierce determination. On the way to school, Jonathan watched Aisha in the rear-view mirror. The girl was quiet, almost motionless, her little hands folded in her lap as if trying to take up as little space in the world as possible. "Aisha," he said softly, "you know you can tell me anything, right?" The girl's eyes widened with instant panic. I am a good girl, Daddy. Mommy Victoria always says, I'm good when I behave myself." The phrase broke Jonathan's heart, but it also fueled his determination. Aisha's body language, her reflexive response about behaving herself. Everything confirmed that the abuse was systematic and psychologically devastating. That afternoon, while Victoria was enjoying her weekly spa session, Jonathan received a visitor at his office. Marcus Thompson, his personal attorney for 15 years and one of the few men he trusted completely, entered with a grim expression. "Jonathan, I got your urgent message. What exactly is going on?" Marcus had represented Jonathan since his first business deals, had been his best man at his wedding, and knew every detail of his personal and professional life. He was also one of the most feared family lawyers in California, known for his ability to destroy cases that seemed impossible to win. Jonathan closed the door and activated a signal blocker he kept in his office for top-secret meetings. Then, without preamble, he showed Marcus the videos he had collected. Marcus's face hardened progressively as he watched the recordings. Victoria forcing Aisha to clean the entire house at the age of 8. Victoria locking the girl in the dark basement for 2 hours as punishment for knocking over a glass of water. Victoria laughing on the phone with friends about how she had trained the little girl perfectly. "Jesus Christ," Marcus muttered, running his hand through his hair. "Jonathan, this is criminal systemic child abuse, emotional neglect, child labor. She could get up to 10 years in prison for this." "I want more than prison, Marcus," Jonathan replied, his voice controlled, but charged with an intensity the lawyer had rarely seen. "I want her to lose everything, the house, the money, the social status, everything she values more than my daughter." Marcus nodded slowly. "This is all-out war, Jonathan." "Are you sure?" "Once we start, there's no turning back. She declared war the moment she put dog food in front of my daughter. I'm just going to finish what she started." During the weekend at Disneyland, which Victoria had initially resisted, claiming it was too stimulating for a child who needed discipline, Jonathan watched Aisha experience genuine joy for the first time in years. He saw her eyes light up on the roller coasters, heard her crystal-clear laughter on the rides, felt her arms wrap around him spontaneously when they won a giant teddy bear. But he also noticed how she constantly checked Victoria's reaction as if she needed permission to be happy. He saw how she rejected cotton candy and popcorn, automatically saying, "Mommy Victoria said, I can't eat junk food." Victoria, on the other hand, spent the whole day taking selfies and posting on Instagram about being a dedicated stepmom, always positioning Aisha in the background or partially cutting her out of the photos. "Beautiful family at Disneyland," she captioned a photo where she appeared radiant next to Jonathan while Aisha was partially hidden behind him. "Being a mom is the greatest joy of my life. #blessed #family #stepmom." The comments poured in. "What a perfect family. Victoria, you are an inspiration. That girl is so lucky to have such a loving mother." Jonathan screenshotted every post, every comment, every publicly documented lie. It would all be used at the right moment. The following Monday, Marcus called with news that would make Victoria regret underestimating the man she had betrayed. "Jonathan, you won't believe what we found out. I hired a private investigator to look into her finances. Victoria didn't just embezzle the money meant for Aisha. She set up fake bank accounts in the girl's name and has been using them to evade taxes for 3 years. Marcus' voice had a tone of grim admiration. She doesn't just mistreat her daughter. She's committing federal fraud using an 8-year-old as a front. The FBI is going to love this. Jonathan smiled for the first time in weeks. But it wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who had built a business empire, knowing exactly when his enemies would hang themselves. "Schedule a meeting with a district attorney for Thursday," Jonathan said. "It's time to show my dear wife what happens when someone messes with my family." Meanwhile, Victoria continued her cruel routines, posting perfect photos on social media and bragging to friends about how she had civilized Aisha. She had no idea that every act of malice was being meticulously documented, that every public lie was turning into irrefutable evidence against her. In the silent laboratory of her own arrogance, Victoria had created the perfect poison for her own destruction. She was just days away from discovering that the quiet man sleeping beside her was not the naive victim she imagined, but a ruthless strategist who had turned her cruelty into her own social and legal death sentence. The storm was brewing on the horizon, and Victoria, blinded by her own wickedness, continued to dance in the rain, unaware that thunder was rapidly approaching. On Thursday morning, Victoria woke up to discover that her main bank account had been frozen by court order. 3 FBI agents were at the door of her mansion with search and seizure warrants. "Mrs. Richards, you are under investigation for tax fraud, tax evasion, and child abuse," announced Special Agent Carmen Rodriguez, flashing her badge. "We need you to come with us for questioning." Victoria's face turned every shade of white. "There must be some mistake. I'm Victoria Richards. My husband is Jonathan Richards of Richards Technologies. You can't just barge into my home." "Actually, we can," Agent Rodriguez replied coldly. "And it was your husband who provided the evidence that made this operation possible." Victoria's legs gave way. Jonathan had orchestrated all of this. While the agents searched the house, photographing every luxurious room bought with the money intended for Aisha, Jonathan arrived accompanied by Marcus and a social worker. His expression was one of absolute calm, like a CEO executing a routine corporate acquisition. "Victoria," he said, his voice echoing through the same kitchen where he had witnessed the devastating scene weeks earlier. "I imagine you're wondering how we got here." Victoria tried to regain her composure, but her hands were shaking uncontrollably. "Jonathan, please, can we talk in private?" "I know there may be some misunderstandings about how I raised Aisha, but misunderstandings," Marcus interrupted, opening a tablet. The screen showed a recording of Victoria forcing Aisha to eat animal feed. Victoria watched herself say, "Eat, you disgusting thing. That's the dinner a liar deserves." Or this one, Marcus swiped to another video. Victoria laughing on the phone. "Someone needs to clean this huge house, don't they?" The blood drained completely from Victoria's face. "You've been spying on me. That's illegal." "Actually," said Jonathan, his voice still controlled. "Installing security devices in your own home to protect a child is perfectly legal, especially when there are well-founded suspicions of abuse." Agent Rodriguez returned carrying a box of evidence. "We found the documents for the fake bank accounts in the minor's name. 3 years of tax evasion using an 8-year-old as a front. These are federal crimes, Ms. Richards." Victoria finally panicked completely. "Jonathan, please. I can explain everything. The money. I just wanted us to live well. Aisha has everything she needs." "Does she?" Jonathan asked with deadly calm. "Does she have the right to eat at the table like a human being? Does she have the right not to work as a maid at 8 years old? Does she have the right to use the money I send specifically for her?" Marcus showed another document on the tablet. $240,000 embezzled over 3 years. Money intended for Aisha's education, clothing, food, and medical care. Used to buy a luxury car, jewelry, and finance her lifestyle. "And there's more," Jonathan continued. "Your Instagram posts have become evidence against you. Every public lie about being a loving mother while abusing a child at home. The FBI has digital crime experts who love cases like this. Victoria tried one last desperate card. "You can't do this to me. We've been married for 15 years. You're going to destroy me." Because of this the word she almost uttered hung in the air like poison. "Because of this, what, Victoria?" Jonathan challenged her, his eyes finally showing his pent-up anger. "Finish the sentence. Show everyone who you really are." Victoria realized the trap, but desperation made her continue. "Because of a child who isn't even ours, a stranger you brought into our home." "Stop," ordered the social worker, filming every word. "You're incriminating yourself further." Marcus smiled coldly. "Perfect. Now we have evidence that the motivation for the abuse was racial prejudice. That makes the crimes hate crimes with much harsher penalties." The reality finally hit Victoria with full force. It wasn't just about prison. Her social life, meticulously crafted over years, would be completely shattered. Every friend from the club who had envied her perfect Instagram would find out the truth. Every family at Aisha's school would know that she mistreated an innocent child. "Please," she begged, tears streaming down her face. "I can change. We can go to family therapy. I am not like this." Jonathan looked at her one last time as his husband. "Victoria, you've shown us exactly who you are for 3 years. The only thing that's changed is that now the whole world will know it, too." At that moment, as Victoria was led away in handcuffs by federal agents, passing neighbors who had gathered to watch the spectacle, one truth crystallized in the air. Sometimes justice does not come from the courts, but from the consequences we quietly build for those who choose cruelty over humanity. 2 years later, Aisha was on stage in the main auditorium of Beverly Hills Academy, one of California's most prestigious private schools, receiving the award for Best Fourth Grader. Her curly hair shone under the spotlights and her radiant smile no longer carried any shadows from the past. "I want to thank my daddy," she said into the microphone, her voice clear and confident. "He taught me that being different isn't something to hide, but something to celebrate, and that a real family is the one who loves you for who you are, not the one who hurts you for being who you are." In the audience, Jonathan felt his eyes fill with tears of pride. At his side, Dr. Patricia Williams, the child psychologist who had accompanied Aisha's healing process, whispered, "You saved more than a child, Jonathan. You saved a soul." The transformation had been gradual, but consistent. Aisha now slept through the night without nightmares. She laughed out loud during movies. She ate at the kitchen table, telling stories about school. She had real friends who came over to sleep on the weekends. She was finally a normal child, living a normal childhood. Richard's Technologies had not only survived the public scandal, but prospered exponentially. Jonathan's story went viral when it was leaked to the press. The millionaire who had discovered and exposed the abuse of his own adopted daughter. Companies around the world wanted to partner with someone who had demonstrated absolute integrity when it mattered most. "Integrity at home translates into integrity in business," Jonathan had said in an interview with Forbes. "If you can't protect an 8-year-old child, how can you protect the investments of thousands of people?" The magazine named him CEO of the Year, and his company doubled in value in 18 months. Meanwhile, Victoria faced a completely different reality. After serving 18 months in prison for tax fraud and child abuse, she had lost literally everything. The divorce left her with $0. The prenuptial agreement she had signed years ago was enforced in its entirety as fraud invalidated any marital protection. Her Instagram account, which once boasted 200,000 followers admiring her perfect life, was deleted after waves of negative comments when the story became public. Former club friends avoided her on the streets. Even her family had distanced themselves, ashamed of the national scandal. Victoria now lived in a small rented apartment in Van Nuys, working as a receptionist at a veterinary clinic. The irony not lost on anyone. Every time she saw news about Jonathan in the business papers or photos of Aisha smiling at school events that went viral on social media, she understood the magnitude of her own stupidity. She had tried to sell her side of the story to tabloids, painting herself as the victim of a controlling husband, but the evidence was too overwhelming. The videos of her abusing an innocent child had shocked the country. No one wanted to hear her excuses. One Sunday afternoon, while Jonathan and Aisha were baking cookies in the kitchen of their new home in Malibu, a mansion overlooking the ocean where Aisha could run freely on the beach, he received an unexpected call. It was Marcus, his lawyer, with some curious news. "Jonathan, Victoria has filed for child support. She claims you left her in a vulnerable financial situation." Jonathan laughed for the first time when he heard his ex-wife's name. "And what did you say?" "I sent him the recordings where she confesses to embezzling money intended for Aisha to buy jewelry." The case was dismissed within 48 hours, and she even received a warning for procedural bad faith. That night, while Aisha slept in her king-size bed in the princess-themed bedroom she had chosen herself, Jonathan reflected on the last 2 years. The sweetest revenge had not been seeing Victoria in prison. Though that had been satisfying, the real victory was in Aisha's laughter echoing through the halls of her new home. Victoria had tried to destroy the spirit of an innocent child out of pure prejudice and greed. In response, Jonathan had built Aisha a world where she was not only protected but celebrated, where her difference was seen as strength, not weakness. The girl who once ate dog food in secret now dined at 5-star restaurants. Not because money mattered, but because she deserved to be treated like the princess she had always been. Aisha hadn't just survived. She had flourished, blossoming into a confident, articulate, and deeply loved child. Sometimes Jonathan still thought about that kitchen in Beverly Hills, about the scene that had changed everything forever. The image of his daughter crouching down eating dog food still caused him physical pain in his chest. But that pain now served a different purpose. It reminded him every day to protect what mattered most. The true measure of a man is not in the money he accumulates or the power he wields, but in how he protects those who cannot protect themselves. Victoria had forgotten this fundamental lesson and paid the highest possible price. She lost the opportunity to be part of the extraordinary life that Aisha would become. Jonathan learned that the most powerful revenge is not to destroy those who betray you. It is to build something so beautiful and meaningful that the betrayal becomes irrelevant. He didn't just get his daughter back. He became the father she always deserved to have. If this story of how a father's love can move mountains and turn injustice into triumph has touched your heart, subscribe to the Black Voices channel for more stories that prove that sometimes the best revenge is simply to live so well that your enemies become irrelevant to your happiness.